You remember the heroes, but not these ones. Hidden between the biggest names, entire worlds of superheroes existed and then vanished without a trace. So why don't you remember them? And more importantly, were they actually better than the ones that survived? In this video, you'll uncover 20 rare 1980s superhero cartoons that time quietly buried. Because by the end, one of them will feel so familiar, you'll wonder how it disappeared at all. The Freedom Force. It looks like a superhero team, but something feels off almost immediately. The characters are powerful, recognizable, even legendary. Hercules, Merlin, Sinbad, Isis. But instead of feeling unified, they feel borrowed, like pieces pulled from different worlds and forced together without a shared foundation. There's no slow build, no origin that connects them. The action begins instantly, as if the show assumes you already understand everything. And that's where the tension quietly forms. Because this isn't a team that grows, it's a team that simply exists. It feels like an early experiment, a version of the superhero team concept before anyone fully understood how to make it work. And once you notice that, every scene starts to feel like a test rather than a finished idea. BraveStarr. At first glance, it feels like a simple fantasy story. A lone hero, a distant world, a powerful sword. But the deeper you look, the more structured it becomes. The hero isn't just wandering, he's positioned. The weapon isn't just magical, it's central. And the villain isn't chaotic. He's always watching, always present. This isn't random storytelling, it's controlled. The conflict repeats, but not in a lazy way, in a pattern, a rhythm, almost like the show is building rules without explaining them. And that's when it shifts, because what looks like fantasy starts behaving like a superhero system. Once you see that structure, it becomes impossible to ignore. And suddenly, it feels far more modern than it should. Thundarr the Barbarian. There's no introduction, no explanation, just a broken world already in motion. Ruins stretch across the landscape. Strange creatures exist without context, and the hero doesn't question any of it, because for him, this is normal. That's the difference. Instead of watching someone become powerful, you're dropped into a world where power is already established, already tested, already necessary. Thundarr doesn't grow into a hero. He exists as one from the start. And that removes something important, the safety of progression. There's no learning curve, no build-up, which means every conflict feels immediate, heavier, and slightly unpredictable. Because if the world is already broken, then nothing is guaranteed to improve. Ulysses 31. It begins like a myth you already recognize. Gods, punishment, a journey forced by forces beyond control. But then something changes. The setting expands. The world becomes technological. Spaceships replace ships. The unknown becomes vast instead of distant. And suddenly, the story isn't just about survival. It's about defiance. The hero isn't just facing enemies. He's resisting a system designed to control him. That's where it becomes different. Because this isn't just mythology retold. It's mythology restructured into rules, consequences, and power dynamics. And once those rules are in place, every decision feels like it matters more than it should. Pole position. At first, it doesn't feel like a superhero show. Cars, racing, technology. Everything looks grounded, fast, mechanical, controlled. But then the pattern starts to shift. The vehicles don't just move, they respond. Hidden abilities, unexpected functions, systems that activate when needed, not constantly. Because the power isn't obvious, it's concealed, and that changes how every moment plays out. You're not watching heroes use abilities, you're watching them reveal them, which creates a different kind of tension because you never fully know what's available until it's already in motion. And that delay turns simple action into something more engaging, not predictable, but reactive. The Adventures of the Galaxy Rangers. At first, it feels like a standard team setup. Different characters, different abilities, a shared mission that moves forward with structure and control. But then the details become clearer. These abilities aren't natural. They're enhanced, engineered, controlled. And that changes everything, because instead of asking what they can do, the question becomes what was done to them. That shift creates a quiet tension beneath every scene, because power here isn't a gift, it's a result. And results can be reversed, modified, taken away. Which means every advantage carries a hidden uncertainty, not visible, not explained, but always present. And once you notice it, every moment of strength feels slightly less secure than it should. Silverhawks. They don't just wear armor, they become it. Metal bodies, human minds. A transformation that feels permanent, not temporary. At first it looks powerful, clean, efficient, almost flawless. But the longer you watch, the more something feels off. Because this isn't an upgrade, it's a replacement. And that's where the tension quietly builds. What happens when the line between human and machine stops being clear? The show doesn't answer it directly. It doesn't need to. Because the question stays with you, not during the action, but after it. Lingering, and that lingering uncertainty turns power into something more complicated than it first appeared. Tiger sharks. At first, the transformation feels exciting. Human to sea creature in seconds. Fast, clean, powerful. It looks like a simple upgrade, an advantage that can be activated whenever needed. But the more it happens, the more unusual it starts to feel. The change isn't just physical. It's behavioral. Movement shifts. Instincts take over. The environment begins to shape how they act. And that's where the tone quietly changes. Because this isn't just about gaining power. It's about adapting to something that may not fully reverse. The more they transform, the less clear it becomes where the human ends and the creature begins. And the show never fully defines that line, which makes every transformation feel slightly different and slightly more permanent than it should. BraveStarr. Strength of the bear, speed of the puma. It sounds simple, almost repetitive, like a formula you expect to repeat without change. But underneath that simplicity, there's structure. Each ability is activated intentionally, chosen, not constant, and that limitation creates something rare, control. Because power here isn't always available. It has to be used at the right moment, and that creates tension in places where most shows remove it. Because now the outcome depends on timing, not just strength. If the choice is wrong, the advantage disappears. And when timing becomes the deciding factor, every decision carries weight, not just what to do, but when to do it, which quietly transforms power from something reliable into something strategic. Visionaries, Knights of the Magical Light. Magic and technology shouldn't coexist smoothly. Here, they overlap. Armor powered by symbols, energy that appears and disappears. Abilities that activate only under specific conditions. Nothing feels permanent, and that instability becomes the center of the tension. Because when power isn't constant, control becomes uncertain. Every activation feels earned, but also temporary. And that temporary nature reshapes every conflict, because there's always a moment where the power might not be there when it's needed. Which means no situation is fully secure. Even advantage feels fragile. And when advantage becomes unreliable, every decision carries risk. Spiral zone. The threat doesn't arrive with noise. It spreads. A zone, invisible, expanding, affecting everything inside it without warning or resistance. People don't just get attacked, they change, slowly, quietly, without realizing it at first. That's what makes it different, because the danger isn't what you see, it's what you become. And once someone enters the zone, there's no immediate way to know what's been altered. No clear signal, no visible shift, which turns every interaction into uncertainty. Not action, but suspicion. And when suspicion replaces clarity, the tension doesn't spike. It lingers. Centurions. Power extreme? It sounds like a slogan, something simple, almost surface level. But the system behind it is precise. No fixed abilities, no permanent form. Everything is modular, assembled when needed, removed when not. That changes the structure of the hero entirely. Because now identity isn't stable. The hero isn't defined by power, but by what they choose to become in each moment. And that flexibility removes predictability. Every encounter can shift, adapt, evolve in real time. Which means outcomes aren't guaranteed, even when the hero appears strong. Because strength isn't fixed, it's selected. And selection always introduces uncertainty. M.A.S.K. At first, it looks mechanical. Vehicles, gadgets, strategy. Everything feels grounded and almost predictable, like a world built on technology rather than transformation. Then the masks activate, and suddenly everything changes. Abilities emerge instantly. Flight, strength, illusion, not gradual, not earned over time, immediate, clean, controlled. But that instant shift introduces something deeper, because the transformation is tied directly to identity. The mask doesn't just enhance the character, it defines what they can do. It determines their role, their advantage, their place in the conflict. Which means removing it changes everything. Power here isn't internal, it isn't permanent, it's conditional. And conditional power always carries risk. Because if something external gives you ability, it can also take it away. And that creates a quiet tension beneath every scene. Not about whether the hero is strong enough, but whether that strength will still be there when it's needed most. Defenders of the Earth. This shouldn't work. Different heroes, different worlds, different tones, forced into a single team without a clear foundation. There's no shared origin, no unified system, nothing that naturally connects them in the way modern teams are built. And yet, it holds, not perfectly, not smoothly, but consistently enough to feel intentional. Because the connection isn't built through structure, it's built through purpose. They don't need the same past, they don't need the same rules, they just need the same goal. And that goal becomes the anchor, which quietly redefines what a superhero team can be. Not similarity, but alignment. And once that idea settles in, the differences stop feeling like weaknesses. They start to feel necessary, because what holds them together isn't how alike they are. It's how clearly they move in the same direction. Bionic 6. A superhero team is expected, a superhero family isn't, and that single difference changes everything, because this isn't just about saving the world, it's about protecting something personal at the same time. Each member has abilities, defined roles, strengths that fit together with precision. On the surface, it functions like any structured team. But underneath that structure, there's something more fragile holding it together, a connection that can't be replaced. When the mission ends, the responsibility doesn't. They don't stop being a team when the danger is gone. They return to something closer, more permanent. They go back to being a family. And that overlap creates a different kind of tension, one most superhero stories avoid. Because failure here doesn't just affect the outcome of a mission, it affects each other, and that makes every decision feel heavier, even before the action begins. Inhumanoids. This one feels different immediately. The tone is heavier, slower, less controlled. There's no sense of balance between hero and villain, no equal footing to rely on. The threats don't feel like obstacles. They feel overwhelming, massive, unpredictable, almost unstoppable in a way that shifts the entire atmosphere of the story. And that imbalance is intentional. Because for once, the heroes don't feel fully in control. Every encounter feels like it could go wrong, not because they're weak, but because the threat is too large to fully understand. And when the enemy isn't clearly defined, the tension never settles. It doesn't resolve. It doesn't fade. It lingers. And that lingering uncertainty becomes the real conflict, one that continues even after the scene ends. Jace and the Wheeled Warriors. The conflict doesn't feel mechanical. It feels alive. At first, that difference isn't obvious. The heroes still use vehicles, still rely on technology, still approach every situation with strategy. But the enemy doesn't respond the way machines should. It doesn't follow patterns. It doesn't repeat behavior. It changes. The more it appears, the more it adapts. Forms shift. Tactics evolve. Weaknesses disappear almost as quickly as they're discovered. And that creates something unstable beneath every encounter, because now there's no fixed strategy. Every solution becomes temporary. Our every victory feels incomplete. What works once doesn't work again. Because you're not fighting something built. You're fighting something that learns, and learning removes predictability. It breaks structure. It forces constant adjustment. It turns control into something fragile, which means the heroes are never fully prepared. And when preparation disappears, tension takes its place. Every encounter becomes uncertain, not chaotic, but unstable. And that instability is what gives the show its edge. Because nothing feels fully contained, and nothing feels guaranteed to stay the same. Saber Rider and the Star Sheriffs. At first, it feels structured, clear team roles, defined abilities, a system you can follow without effort. Each character fits into place. Each mission unfolds with purpose. And the rhythm feels controlled, almost predictable. But that control doesn't last. Small shifts begin to appear. Moments don't resolve as cleanly. Conflicts stretch longer than expected. The tone adjusts quietly, without announcing itself. And that's where the tension forms, because the structure remains, but the outcomes begin to drift. The danger isn't always visible. Not every threat arrives with force. Some exist in uncertainty, in hesitation, in delay, in something that doesn't fully reveal itself. And when the threat isn't clear, control becomes an illusion. The characters move forward, but not with certainty. They react more than they anticipate. They adjust instead of dominate, which changes how every moment feels, because now you're not watching a team execute a plan. Yet you're watching them respond to something they don't fully understand. And that uncertainty reshapes every outcome, even when it looks like things are under control. Robotech. This isn't just action, it's consequence. At first, it moves like any other animated series. Conflict, response, resolution. But something begins to separate it almost immediately. The story doesn't reset. Events don't disappear after they happen. Loss doesn't fade. Decisions don't dissolve into the next episode. Instead, everything carries forward, and that changes the entire weight of the narrative. Because now every moment matters beyond itself. Because the story remembers. And when a story remembers, the weight builds. You're not just watching events unfold, you're watching them accumulate. Each choice connects to the next. Each outcome shapes what follows. Nothing exists in isolation, which means tension doesn't release, it compounds. And that accumulation transforms simple action into something heavier, something lasting. Because what happens here doesn't feel temporary, it feels permanent. And once permanence enters the story, every decision becomes more important than it first appears. Dino Riders. At first it looks simple. Dinosaurs, weapons, action. But then something shifts. These aren't just creatures being controlled, they're being enhanced, equipped, transformed into something more than they were. And that changes the entire dynamic, because the power doesn't belong to the hero, it's transferred, shared between human and creature, technology layered onto instinct. And that creates something unstable, because instinct doesn't follow strategy. It reacts, which means control is never complete. And when control isn't complete, every advantage carries risk. That's what makes it different. This isn't just about heroes becoming stronger. It's about trying to control something that was never meant to be controlled. And that idea still exists today. In every story where power feels just slightly out of reach. These weren't just forgotten cartoons. They were early versions of ideas that would later define entire genres. So the question isn't why they disappeared, it's why we stopped noticing them. because hidden inside these shows are the foundations of what we watch today. And once you see that, you won't see modern superheroes the same way again.